countdown to the last comic shop in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Who knows what evil lurks in the hearts of men? The Shadow knows.
Your local blue coal dealer presents The Shadow. These half-hour dramatizations are designed to forcibly demonstrate to old and young alike that crime does not pay. Before The Shadow's thrilling adventure begins, here's a money-saving suggestion from the last comic shop.
That's right. Get your comic book supplies. BCW supplies.
Does LCSPOD get you anthracite coal as well, discount?
It gets you 10% off your comic books here at the Last Comic Shop Podcast. That's right, it's Movie Mayhem, and we are not shamelessly just plugging BCW stuff here, but that's...
Well, we are, but still.
It's true. They are a wonderful sponsor of this show. But yeah, I'm the host with the most, Danny Larson. Welcome back to Movie Mayhem. It's week number 2, and it is my pick this week, and we are doing all things Shadow on this week's show. I'm joined by J.A. Scott and Chad Smith, as well as the wonderful Mikey Wood, and thank you so much to J.A. and Mikey for doing their rendition of how some of those old radio programs of the Shadow used to start.
He had that evil laugh that was like Orson Welles for a while. But how much scarier would it have been if he was like, The Shadow knows? Or just something like
Full-on Krusty the Clown.
Yeah. Would have been terrifying. People would have been like, Jesus, fine, crime does not pay. We'd have... Yeah.
I think people would be genuinely more suspicious about what was going to happen next. They'd be like, well, where are we going with this, huh? But where are we going with this week's show? We are going to start off by doing a comic book. And J.A., why don't you tell us what we're reading for the comic book paired with the Shadow movie, which we'll get to.
We are reading The Shadow, Blood and Judgment, written and illustrated by Howard Chaykin.
Ooh.
With letters by Ken Bruzenak, colors by Alex Wald, and the version that we read was the Dynamite reissue, so there's some remastering by Mike Kelleher.
Which, this is the only part we'll all complain that the remastering does that thing with modern comics where they smooth everything over, they take the texture out of things. Oh man, I found these issues in Buck Bins, and it's so much cooler in the paper form.
If you're reading it from in the paper form, does the story make more sense?
No.
Oh, wow.
Story makes plenty of sense.
All right, let's let 10 cents come from Mikey Wood. Maybe he'll give us a synopsis that'll make us feel like this story does have some sense too.
Yeah. Well, the Shadow has been missing for 35 years. He comes back, and his past is coming back to bite him in the ass as well. You know, he's been gone since 1949. He appears out of nowhere, looking not a single day older than he did the last time anyone saw him. And his agents are being picked off one by one by some mysterious assailants. And they want to find out why. Yeah. And we get a little bit of his origin story in there as well. So
right.
This version of his origin story, because the Shadow has multiple origin stories.
Yeah, that's true. That has always been one of the most difficult thing about reading any sort of Shadow is the fact that, like, again, you had the pulp version of the Shadow, you had the radio version of the Shadow, you even had some like movies back in the day with the Shadow, which again, they all had different origins, and some people try to weave them all together and make a tapestry, and some of it works and some of it doesn't. Kind of like two different characters, but whatever will make it work.
I'm with Team JA on this one. The fact that they were two different characters, like, wait, I thought he was that guy, but that guy's old and the other guy's not old, but that's not the guy that it is, but it is that guy because that guy was that guy in hiding. And I don't know what's going on. I need someone to explain all this stuff to me.
The whole clouding men's minds, the book was clouding my mind.
Oh, no.
Well, we'll start off with Mikey because the reason why I wanted to have Mikey on this week's show is because he's a pretty big fan of actually the Shadow in comic books.
Yeah.
And especially this particular retelling by his buddy Howard.
I was going to say an even bigger fan of Mr. Chaykin.
Our pal Howard. Yeah. The pulp version of the Shadow is Kent Allard, who occasionally borrows the identity of Lamont Cranston from the actual Lamont Cranston when the actual Lamont Cranston is out in Europe or something like that. He uses Lamont Cranston's ID as an alias because they resemble each other. Whereas the radio show of the Shadow was just straight up Lamont Cranston. So this sort of mixes the two together. So yeah, this is Kent Allard, pilot for hire, meets Lamont Cranston, wealthy but corrupt sort of criminal in the Orient, through happenstance end up crash landing and being rescued by the people of basically a Shangri-La type society. Kent is trained in the ways of sort of ninja mystical kind of people, whereas Lamont Cranston decides he's going to rip them off because they're also incredibly wealthy. Lamont tumbles off the side of a cliff at one point, and Kent adopts his identity and returns to America and takes on his role of the Shadow, and does so for a good long time until, again, disappearing in 1949 without a mention. Lamont survived the fall, and he has been back in America as Preston Mayrock. Now he's going to destroy the world.
Mm-hmm. Question. In the pulps, whenever Kent Allard would run around as Lamont Cranston, was Lamont Cranston like this terrible criminal guy? Like simultaneously? No. He was like his agent, like one of the people that are getting popped off here in the book. Basically,
the Shadow is like, you're going to let me be you. And if you don't, I'm going to become you whether you like it or not. So Lamont Cranston was like, okay.
Yeah.
I'll go to Europe and you can be me if you want to. And that's kind of the short version of it, yeah.
Yeah, so it like a lot of things nowadays, they took what was genuinely a huge backstory for the Shadow that happened in the pulps. And when they decided to put out the radio series, they're like, how do we condense this into something that is digestible by the masses? I mean, we get that all the time nowadays. So that's why they added Margot Lane to the radio program. Margot Lane was not in the pulps originally.
No.
I'm pretty sure they gave him the whole like Cloudmen's Minds things just because it was sounded cool on radio. I think that was the story of how it went. Like, it was just like a neat radio effect. And so Orson Welles had this cool voice, and so they're like, let's do that. And
in the radio show, he was just straight up invisible. He was just an invisible man, yeah.
And then eventually that became a very popular version, and then they just tried to start jamming these two ideas together and being like, let's have this guy run around with two guns and the ability to Cloudmen's Minds, which I thought was fine.
Yeah, and this comic is very much the sort of analog hero in a digital world sort of story. It's the absurdity of the 1930s pulp hero, where basically all they did was mow people down with ultraviolence, brought into this modern sort of 80s kind of world, and it's that conflict between the two that proves interesting. And they explore it even further later on, because this spun off into a series that was written by Andy Helfer and drawn by Bill Sienkiewicz, and then eventually Kyle Baker, which is utterly bonkers. And you need to find, because you could find those back issues in dollar bins, but you gotta read it. It was like 20 something issues, and it got canceled because Street and Smith, the guys who own the rights to the Shadow, were like, this is insane and we hate it. And you know, fans of the Shadow were like, this is insane and we hate it, except for some of us who were like, this is phenomenal. This is utterly madness.
Yeah, so coming from a place where I'm not, I don't have extensive knowledge about the Shadow, and somebody who really enjoys the work of Howard Chaykin, but at the same time, Howard Chaykin will go out of his way to sometimes make things challenging to figure out, right? Like, I know a lot of times when I'm digging into a Chaykin work, like, I'm going to have to take some notes on this one. And like this one, especially the first issue or two, I was just all over the place with the different identities and who's who. And it's different because some people are aged up, and then Ken Allard didn't age because he was in Shambhala. And like, so I had a whole bunch of wires crossing here and there. But my one comment, I will say, like, it's such a beautiful book. This is such a fun artistic exercise to look at.
Right.
And the way Chaykin draws clothes and fashion and weird, kinky sex stuff.
Yeah, I'm glad that you're bringing this up, Chad, because this is now, I think, the third time that I've read this particular book. And the first time that I read through these 4 issues, I kind of sort of hated it. Like, I won't lie, I didn't like it at all, primarily because of the first issue. I feel like if you don't really know much about the Shadow or the pulps or anything like that, you're going to be pretty lost in that first issue. You don't know like why these people are dying and why this one guy ends up in a water cooler. Like, you're just like, that just as an interesting visual, but I have no idea why that guy was killed and shoved into a water cooler or even how that happened. But I will say that even with the first reading, the one thing I didn't hate was some of the art, especially some of the way that he frames out certain images. My favorite image in this entire book is this one page where Ken goes after Lamont Cranston. You've got the one panel where it's just small panels of him running towards Lamont to a crescendo, and then it's like he's knocking him off the cliff in the next one with this hit of this rifle. And as somebody that got to talk to Howard in an interview, he's always about how stories should move in terms of linear time. And he loves that as a concept, the passage of time in comic books in a way that doesn't work anywhere else. And I think that page really, to me, spoke to like what Howard does as an artist. Again, it's still like I couldn't understand what the hell was going on, but it looked pretty.
Yeah, I think I would have preferred to have seen this in the original floppies. I struggled with some of the art just to differentiate some of the people on first reading. I was like,
the floppies aren't going to help you there, buddy, because Chaykin has 3 faces.
especially when they're back in the 40s. I was like, yeah, which one's Lamont and which one's Allard? I struggled. Like, oh, okay. Thank for the guy in the onesie is the hero.
the jerky one was Lamont.
They've got slightly different noses, but that's the idea. Is that comes from the pulps is the fact that they look very similar.
Yeah.
They look enough alike that when he comes back and claims to be Lamont Cranston, anyone that knew Lamont Cranston doesn't question it.
And that's what you just alluded to is the problem I had going into this is because I didn't read the pulps. I know the Shadow primarily from the radio and then the movie that we're going to discuss, for better or worse. So I was like, where are the clouding of men's minds? Where is the whole Shadow bit where he's disappearing? And there was none of that. There was just a lot of him going around and shooting people with his guns. Wow, okay. And then I wasn't ready for the whole, modern take on everything. Every Shadow I have known has been 1940s, 1930s Shadow, and this was not. This is modern day Shadow. Though reading it in 2025, it is a bit dated. There's that one scene was like, and we both have AIDS.
Yeah.
Where did that come from?
And that's the other thing that I'll talk about. The reason I didn't like this book originally when I first read it the first time was because I didn't understand what Howard was doing with the Shadow being so chauvinistic.
Oh, yeah,
people call him out on it.
Basically shacks up with that one girl. He goes, yeah, but you could be my new Margot Lade. Mm-hmm. Well, she came around to me eventually, too.
Do you like when everybody calls you master? Well, yes, I do. In fact, would you like to do it as well? Again, Howard's always been somebody to push his buttons, especially with sexuality and violence. Mm-hmm. And so I've come to appreciate that in the second, third, fourth readings that I've done of this particular series, to the point where now I kind of sort of get it. But I will be very blunt. I think that issue 1 is a challenge for anybody that isn't wholly like, I love Howard Chaykin's work, I love The Shadow, and I got to read this. Like, I feel like it's going to be like, whoa, what is this? And they're going to be turned off immediately.
You gotta let the story play out, though. You find out eventually when Mavis Lockhart, as she's figuring out the connection between all these people, you find out the connection between all these people. Mavis Lockhart finds out that they're all connected somehow to the Shadow. And then you, as the reader, if you're not familiar with it, are like, okay, well, that makes sense. So, yeah, it's not spoon-fed to us. Like, he never does that. But, yeah, I remember when it came out, it was 86, and I had read that, and then I liked it, but I don't know why I liked it. It was just unlike anything I'd ever seen before. And then I went back and started looking up American Flag. And this is from that period of time. This is like his American Flag storytelling style. It's very, very much with the panel layouts and stuff like that. So, yeah, I mean, it was something that took me a reading or two. And by the time the 4th issue rolled around, I was like, okay, that was cool. That was really cool. And then I just kept following it. Like a couple months later, the series came out, and which is a different kind of bonkers. But there's also this sort of really sly kind of sense of humor about that book. The whole idea of Mayrock cloning himself and the clone being sort of a dipshit, like this big meaty dipshit.
Yeah.
And the wife being attracted to the clone because
and Preston being sort of okay with it, almost.
Very okay with it.
Just sitting there watching, like I enjoy watching all this.
Yeah, there's that sort of like Chaykin thing, Chaykin's sense of humor.
Isn't that why they have the motel chair?
yeah, cool. And I do like that Mavis. Like he does that sort of chauvinistic thing to Mavis, and she like puts him in his place, but then she's like, you know what, F it, all right, yeah, let's do this,
right.
And the lettering in this in the book is really cool too, because you get to Lorelei, who's the phone sex operator in the Iron Lung, and when she's working, her speech balloons are all hearts, which makes you like kind of realize she's talking real sweet and cute and things like that. I had asked him if that was his idea or if that was Ken's idea, because they work very well together and they still work together. And that was his idea to make the bubbles hearts. And that was something that you didn't see very much there, and like how the Shadows dialogue boxes were differently shaped. That was relatively new as well at the time. So it's not as groundbreaking and as say the American Flag work that he was doing at the time, but it plays off of that really well. And
I don't know. That was the big irony for me. It's strange to me how much this story is, of a man who's out of time, coming back into the 1980s, and this story that's relatively like, it's so 80s centric, right down to the hating on Wham that goes on in the punk rock scenes. To look at it, almost 40 years later. It's dated, but it's ahead of its time for when it happened, if that makes sense. It's tough to balance how much I like the art and how much the story was like, wait, what? And then what? It was lacking a lot of those traditional Shadow tropes I was familiar with. Like, at no point did he become, shadowy. He just shot a bunch of people.
You wanted radio show Shadow, but this is pulp Shadow. Like it really is. It's a 1930s pulp comic hero brought into the, and you almost kind of wonder when you're reading it, you get this vibe and you wonder like whose side is Howard on? Is he like pro 80s, or is he saying, oh, this is all bullshit and the 30s is the way to go?
But it's both, and he's so 80s in here, like the cars, the fashion, like everything, like it all fits that 80s vibe, and it's so of its time. I was listening to somebody talk about how he influenced Frank Miller, like in 1986, with some of the TV scenes between this and American Flag, and like Howard Chaykin is setting down the groundwork for how comics are going to move forward, but in such a way where it's I don't know. There's just this big dichotomy for me where it's like you have the guy that's out of time, but then it is the 80s, and it's very much so the 80s, but then some of the stuff he's doing is redefined.
It is weird. It's like there's that flying Jetsons car.
But yeah, that's the only futuristic thing we see, other than a few mentions in of Shambhala and their science methods, and it's almost mystical, but it's not, but it is.
Well, one thing that's not mystical is our rating scale for this particular comic book. We're going to give it a 1 out of 4, as we normally do, and Jay's going to give it to us. So, Jay, what do we got this week for Shadow, Blood, and Judgment?
I want to know why the TV pictures for the Shadow use pictures of Zorro instead.
They're taking a wild guess.
And that's what they ended with.
It's been like 80
Zorro.
years.
We're going to take a wild stab in the dark about what this guy looks like. Zorro. That's what we got to go with.
And that's the other thing. The Cranston's wearing a Dick Tracy hat for the first half of it. Like, what the heck?
Oh, no, the pleated pants, it's all 80s. We're going to go with shoulder pads.
Shoulder pads.
1 out of 4 shoulder pads, because it's just all these padded coats
Very
and
sharp
everything.
shoulders, yeah.
Yes.
That's true.
Shoulders that can cut glass.
All right, well, let's start off with Chad, because I feel like he was the most conflicted.
Yeah. No, I thanks for putting me first, man. As I don't know. I genuinely don't know. There's a part of me that wants to like this a lot, and there's a part of me that's like, no, I did not like this. And I keep going back. Like, the art is fantastic, and the storytelling, it's top notch, and it's you don't say no to Howard Chaykin stuff. This is it's great, even though there are only 2 faces. Here he uses it as a feature, not a bug. As the guys only have the same face. But at the end of the day, I do think I want more spoon feeding. I don't know. I'm gonna say a 2.5 shoulder pads. No, 2.75. We'll go 2.75 because there's an 80s-ness in here that I like too, and it's just weird enough that I think if I were like you, Andy, to go back and give it a couple more rereads, I think I might get more out of it as I go. But what's here is enough to keep me intrigued. And
okay. Well, I'm going to follow up with that, Chad, because, again, I think it dovetails into my rating. I remember doing a written review of this particular book several years back, and I think I gave it like a scathing grade because it's a lot of the things that other people have said on this particular show. Oh, it's not the radio shadow. Oh, it's too sadomasochistic at times, too overtly sexual. It's too violent and ultra violent, all this other jazz. There was a lot of turnoffs for me the first time that I read it. But I will say this: the more times I went back and I read it, and now this is like maybe the 4th or 5th time I've read through it, it comes up in grade every single time. And it's because there is a lot of nuance in this particular story that you don't get in the first reading. I really feel like, again, Howard is a guy that rewards you for multiple readings. There are different things you get out of it after reading it a couple times. And after you get kind of the basic plot down and you understand that, it's almost like you've taken the first step. And now you can get into the nuance. You can get into why the art works the way that it does. It's gone up tremendously since the first time I read it. Now I give this closer to a 3. I think I'm going to give it a 2.95. It's still not my favorite thing involving the Shadow. Honestly, my favorite thing with the Shadow is a series that Dark Horse came out with in the 90s. J.A. had it with Michael Kaluuya art. I think it's called Coils of the Leviathan or something. It's just kind of awesome. Just from a visual standpoint, the Shadow just never looked cooler than he did when Michael Kaluuya drew him. And so, that's some of my favorite Shadow. Plus the Denny O'Neil stuff. I would like the Denny O'Neil stuff. But I will say that this is a book that will reward you if you give it a real, true chance. And not only when I say give it a chance, but I'm saying, read all of it, put it down, come back to it. I'm sure you're gonna enjoy it even more. You just have to get past that first reading, which is, again, tough for some people. They may just be like, no, I'm not reading this. They may put it down, then they may never go back to it. But I'm telling you, you're going to be rewarded if you go back.
Yeah, man, I like a lot about this show. I like the fact that Harry is kind of doing a traveling magic show using the Shadow persona. I like that Margot is still pissed off at him 35 years later. And you find out, and my recommendation is where you kind of find out why she's pissed off. But yeah, it takes a second or two, like a lot of things and I think it's one of those things where your maturity as a reader grows with it. And this associated Howard with the pulp stuff, and everybody automatically assumed that he was a huge fan of the pulp stuff, but he really wasn't. He was like a sword and sandal fantasy kind of guy. Like, he was more into things like John Carter and stuff like that. So pulp really wasn't his forte. This was just something that he came in and did. So, yeah, I mean, I would give it at least a 3.75. Yeah, I mean, it's not my favorite piece of his work. I don't even know if it's necessarily my favorite Shadow thing. The series that comes after this,
one with Sienkiewicz art.
Yeah, like Sienkiewicz, and then later on with, it's so weird, and you're either going to hate it or like just be like, this is hilarious because it's so funny. And so, but this planted those seeds for what Helfer did afterwards. So yeah, it's a strong 3.75 for me. I love it. I bound it, and I think it was like my first real Howard Chaykin book, and I bought it specifically because it was The Shadow, from past knowledge with my grandfather having some of the pulps, which I wish I still had. But yeah.
Yeah, I struggled with this. I struggled to identify people because of the 1 to 2 faces. I struggled with the whole storyline just in general, especially that first issue. I'm like, I got what he was doing, what Chaykin was doing, but like every page told a different story. It's just some rando dying. And I was like, why do I care about any of this? I don't.
Yeah.
Tell me a story.
It's the opposite of putting a team together. Chaykin starts at the end.
Yeah.
We're picking them off.
I guess sort of from a motif and a narrative, maybe that works, but I didn't have enough going in to understand a lot of it, I felt. And it just made me felt stupid. And I hated that. I was like, why am I feeling stupid? Why am I being asked to read this? It makes me feel stupid. I don't know what's going on. What's in the 80s? And this guy looks the same as this other guy. But the 80s sucked. I'm sorry. God, we're done with it.
No.
I really struggled with it, but now that we've talked about it, now I feel like I need to go back and read it a second time and give it a little bit more of its due. It also helps to know some of that backstory about, this is more based on the pulp and that. Maybe if I read some of the old pulp magazines, I would appreciate it more. And I do like the art, as you said, Andrew, the way he condenses time. He's showing movement through his use of layout. I thought that was quite compelling. But I struggled with the story so much, I think I can only give it a 2.5.
All right.
That's
yeah,
fair.
that's fine.
Yeah.
You're going to go back and you're going to read it. Maybe it'll bump it up. We're just hoping that you give it a read. Because I do think it's worth a read, especially if you like the Shadow movie, which we'll be talking about in just a few seconds. Stay tuned for more Last Comic Shop and Movie Mayhem right after this.
Looking to save money on your collectible supplies? Whether it's comics, cards, sports memorabilia, or miscellaneous pop culture bric-a-brac, make sure to use promo code LCSPOD to get 10% off your orders at bcwsupplies.com. Not only does it get you a discount on BCW's already low prices, but using LCSPOD at checkout is an amazing way to show support to the Last Comic Shop podcast, the most incredible comic book podcast on the airwaves. So if you are in need of collectible supplies, head out to bcwsupplies.com and use promo code LCSPOD today. That's promo code LCSPOD. Cheers!
Last Comic Shop listeners, would you go to Kickstarter and search for Suspicious Behavior Productions? Because if you do, you can get the first issue of our comedy, horror, political satire by Centena Kill. And you can get your first edition autographed print copy of Invasion from Planet WrestleTopia, the complete series, all for just $19. But you only have until May 15th. So go to Kickstarter, look for us, Suspicious Behavior Productions. Thank you for your support.
And we are back, and we are going to travel back to the days of yore. That's right, 1994. We are going to deal with the Alec Baldwin Shadow movie, and J.A. is going to start us off by giving us the who's it's involved in this cinematic
thing.
Yeah.
You guys are harsh. We ain't even got into it yet.
So this is The Shadow out of Universal Pictures, directed by Russell Mulcahy on a screenplay by David Cupp, starring Alec Baldwin as Lamont Cranston, the Shadow, John Lone, Penelope Ann Miller, Peter Boyle, a very young old Ian McKellen, Jonathan Winters, and Tim Curry playing himself.
And don't forget the dad from Alf.
Oh, yeah, the dad from Alf is in this. But yeah, it's all about Tim Curry. Anytime you get Tim Curry just vamping it up on the screen, it's just priceless. He's got the little spit dribble in the one scene.
Yeah, sorry, I got distracted. That happened a lot while I was watching the movie, too. Anyway, okay, so now that we know the who's it's, let's dive in. to the What's-Its with Mr. Andrew Larson, who, as we're going over this, I was doing some background research, and I looked onto the Rotten Tomatoes, and I saw a review from an Andrew L. Glowing praise for The Shadow, and I was like, do we know this guy?
That's true. It is my review, so if you want to go out to Rotten Tomatoes and look up Andrew L's review of The Shadow, feel free. Because I'm not going to shy away from this. This was a great movie in 1994. I enjoyed the hell out of it. I went to see it with J.A. in the movie theaters and his dad. He got one box of Raisinets. I think he spent 2 hours just eating one box of Raisinets. But long story short, the 10-cent synopsis for this movie is Lamont Cranston, who is the Shadow that we all kind of sort of know. He got out of World War I and went over to the Orient and started making money in the heroin trade out there. Became a brutal, vicious warlord / gangster. Eventually, these Jedi using force wielders in some ancient temple over there say, we're going to make you a good guy, Lamont, and teach you all of our awesome mental power tricks so you can go back to America and make up for all the bad things that you've done. And
Which
so he
was
does.
weird, by the way. Like, hey, you're a bad guy. We're going to give you all these powers. Now you're good.
But
that's how they...
if you notice, they got him out of China. They were like, yeah, we'll give you all this stuff, but leave our country, please.
Yeah, don't try to fix things here. Go back to where you came from. You're fine over there. But he does. He goes back there, and he becomes the Shadow, and it's like several years later, and he's already got his massive network of agents.
And cool vacuum tubes. Lots of vacuum tubes.
Yes! Cool.
I remember when my mom would go to the
miniatures.
bank, and the drive-thru at the bank had the vacuum tubes.
In case.
Yes.
In the midst of all of this agent gathering, Shiwan Khan, the last descendant of Genghis Khan, comes to America. And he's also got Shadow-esque powers, but he's using them for evil still. And this sets up a battle between Lamont Cranston Shadow and Shiwan Khan over whose force powers are the best. And eventually Margot Lane shows up, and they have kind of like this mental sex stuff going on. And it's kind of throwbacky, and there's an atomic bomb in it. They try to marry the Shadow from the pulps with the mental stuff, and I think they do a pretty good job.
And beryllium cubes.
Spheres,
Not cubes.
Spheres.
That's right.
Yes.
All right. Mr. Michael Wood,
Yes.
I am
Yes.
getting myself all confused here. So why don't you give us your initial impressions on The Shadow?
It is campy. Like, you have to know that going in, that this is a chunk of campy cheddar. Like, it is cheeseball and campy and silly. You got to understand this. So Dick Tracy hit and was a moderate success. Batman had just done well in '89. Other film studios realized that these old characters were cheap to get the rights to. So that's why you got things like The Shadow, and you got Rocketeer, and you got the Phantom, and, you know, all those things all sort of came out within the same sort of time period. So this really plays up the campy elements of it. There's some line delivery in this that's like just absolute garbage, and there's some line delivery that's really funny for the
Unintended.
some of it unintended, some of it really intended. Like there's the part where Shiwan Khan first shows up. He just kind of shows up in the Shadow's lair, and he's like threatening basically to destroy the whole city. And then he mentions his tie. He's like, "Where did you get that tie?" Brooks Brothers. He's like, "You are a barbarian." You know, the prologue has probably the worst acting from Alec Baldwin that I've ever seen, where he's just like, "Where did that come from?" Like, really, really bad. But if you put this sort of on the same level as the Flash Gordon movie, and you realize that it is intentionally campy, and if that's your kind of thing, it's like the Flash Gordon movie or Doc Savage Man of Bronze from '70, whatever. You know, it's got that tongue-in-cheek sort of vibe thing, and there's a lot of really cool stuff, a lot of like neat effects for Shiwan Khan, like when the tapestry comes out and when the clothing matches the floor. And Russell Mulcahy is weird as a director. He directed the original Highlander, but he also directed Highlander 2: The Quickening. So the movie kind of doesn't know what it wants to be. Yeah, Tim Curry comes in and like just chews everything up, and his character like is there and then is gone and then is there again, and I wonder how much was chopped out and like what's missing. And there's never been a DVD release that has any kind of, other than me, maybe nobody would buy a special edition of that, you know, like you have to go in knowing that you're dealing with a chunk of cheese. And like Margot Lane has psychic abilities that she did not have in any former version and has not since had in any version,
and walks around the entire movie in a silk slip.
Looks phenomenal.
Do you believe in telepathy? Anyway, all right. J.A., what did you think of The Shadow?
I remember liking it when I saw it in the movie theater, which tells you how young I was. I think more than anything. No, let me... I think I have to agree with Mikey Wood that if you sort of invest in the campiness of it, it can be a bit of a fun story. It's not a great movie by any means. That being said, there are some incredible shots. I think they did not have the budget that Batman did. That's quite obvious. Some of the CGI does not hold up at all. But there are other effects that I think hold up incredibly well. The whole time when is it what's his name? Sherwan.
Not Sherman. Sherwan Khan.
Shere Khan from Tailspin.
Okay. When Sherwan Khan is doing his mind control thing, all they did was throw on these pupilless contacts in his eyes that makes his eyes look massive, and it's a really good effect. And that was like, $2 of some contacts they just threw in his eyes. I thought that was great. To see these Mongol warriors walking around in beautiful costumes in 1930s New York was done really well. The set decoration, incredible. But then, as you said, the beginning, some of the line delivery. All right. Andy,
I want to let you jump in here. Do you want to go first, or do you want me to?
No. I want the whole pile of spaghetti.
You want to clean up?
Well, just dump it all on, and then me just tell you how you're all wrong and how you have no joy in life. But go ahead, Chad.
And we haven't even gotten to Purba yet.
I don't know how to follow that. What's Purba?
Purba's the knife.
The knife thing.
Okay.
Yeah.
You remember the name of the knife. Yeah, this movie didn't come across as cheaply done. I thought for 1994, like the special effects and the costumes and the score, you could tell there were competent people working in this movie. They just weren't putting their best effort in. And I enjoyed so many of the actors that were in this movie. Jonathan Winters, he's hilarious. Alec Baldwin, he's hilarious. And I think the movie was campy to the point where, Tim Curry, his name's Claymore, and he's the guy whose whole purpose is just to get stepped on before everything blows up like a Claymore mine. But I didn't think it went campy enough. And I didn't think it went clever enough. And I didn't think there were reasons for why characters did the things they did. They just did them. And so I don't think it's good. Let me get that out of the way. I don't think it's bad either. I just think every single part of it was missing something to put it over the top. Like, it wasn't campy enough. There were way too many suicides and people shooting themselves, but it wasn't dark enough to go full, gothic horror, because you would have those campy moments where someone had just jumped off a building and Alec Baldwin makes a quip about, the things aren't just going to fall out of the sky. Place. I mean, it just seemed like at no point did it do anything well enough to get over the hump, right? The Shere Khan was not an intimidating villain. The action scenes, they were all fine, but there was nothing that made you say, wow, or, you had the one scene where the Shadow gets shot in the shadow form, and that was neat, but then I don't know, there was so much of it that just didn't make sense to me. It was like characters were their motivations, they just did things to do things. It wasn't retro enough, it wasn't campy enough, it wasn't gothic scary enough, it wasn't cool enough. It just wasn't enough for me. So Andy, There you go.
Well, the problem is you guys all have legitimate complaints about this movie. And I'm not going to go on this show and say this is the greatest thing since Citizen Kane. It's not. It is a early comic book movie from the 90s. Like, you know, if you sat down and you watched The Mask or you watched The Phantom. Again, I like The Phantom, too, with Billy Zane and, you know, Slam Evil. That was a fun movie. Patrick McGowan's in that movie. I mean, it's a good movie. It's just that, again, I can't be so critical of these particular movies because these were kind of like the baby steps into this arena that would eventually set up like movies that we could get later. Right? Like The Shadow is a really difficult character to make a movie about. The whole point of The Shadow is you can't see him. So how are you supposed to film something you can't see?
Better than this. I was so bored. I was watching it doing laundry, and I just shifted to the laundry machine because that was more entertaining.
It's all right, Chad, but what I'm trying to tell you is you already have a couple strikes going against this particular character even before you get into the movie. And so I feel like they were kind of at least original in coming up with, you know, some ways to explain how, you know, the Shadow has these powers. Again, sure. Is it just like the Jedi? Is it just like they have telekinesis and they can throw things and you can't see them and they can cloud men's minds and influence them? Yeah, it's all that. They found ways of kind of tying this stuff in that didn't previously exist there. And trying to make it sense for the audience out of something that really, gosh, I mean, it was just tough. It was a challenge. And I agree with you, Chad, that like it could have been more campy. It could have been more dark. I feel like it could have gone either way and you would have gotten a better movie out of it. I wish they would have gone more dark, to be honest. I would have felt, you know, there were some scenes in that were like genuinely creepy. Like, Lamont Cranston has this dream where he rips off his face, and it's Shiwan Khan underneath it, and it's supposed to be that they're the opposite side of the same coin. He has that evil within him, just like Shiwan Khan, and he can go bad too. But they didn't play enough with that, and honestly, I blame Alec Baldwin because, like, I don't think Alec Baldwin, in retrospect, was a decent enough guy to play the intensity that you needed from the Shadow in this.
Well, it was in that whole time when they were trying to make Alec Baldwin into an action hero. He had just done Hunt for Red October. He'd done that Miami Blues movie. But he had also done an incredible star turn as a cameo in Glengarry Glen Ross, which is where Alec Baldwin deserves to live his entire life, not this stuff. So I think he was miscast.
I think 30 Rock is where Alec Baldwin should be. That was my favorite Alec Baldwin.
I like how they made his face change, and I like that when he was the Shadow, his eyes were just these chrome dots in his head that reflected the light. I liked a lot of the lighting when he was like using his to cloud men, like the shadow would form over, except for his eyes, and there was a lot to like about it. But tonally, like the whole idea of like that entire building being erased from people's minds because Shiwan Khan had hypnotized the entire city. That's brilliant, and it worked, and I love that. So much to like, but then tonally, he like pushes the Mongol warrior off of the roof and rides him down the building and lands on top of him, and you're like, that was badass, and he's like, next time you be on top or something like that. It's like, oh god,
quips. Yeah, I think Michael Wilmington from the Chicago Tribune probably said it best in his review of the movie. The Shadow shows what can happen when you overdress pulp. You wind up with something gorgeous and suffocated, bejeweled trash floundering in its oversplendid stuffings.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
But it's true. Visually, it's a beautiful movie. There's a lot of cool effects, even for the time. I don't even, we're talking about the dagger. I still like the dagger. Like, it works. At least it was, I'm pretty sure it was claymation, which, I mean, was a practical effect at the time, which kudos
not
for
when
using
that bites the hand is bad.
But the miniature work in this, the design of the clothes and the giant bathysphere scene, which I always loved, like, filling it up with water, and there's some things to love. I just feel like, Alec Baldwin, man, in retrospect, not a good choice. John Lone, though, awesome choice for this. I disagree with saying that he wasn't an interesting bad guy, because I think he was an interesting bad guy.
Let me ask you a question, though, real quick about that. Why did he want to blow up the city?
He wanted to blow up the city because he wanted to show his power. He wanted to show he could do it. The decadence of the West and thinking that they were better. That's what it should have been. I don't know if that was in the actual movie. That's what it should have been,
but he
That's what it should have been, though.
He's like, I'm going to blow up the city.
That's how I'm going to take over the world, is blowing up New York. That's a good place to start.
Did he ship himself in that in the sarcophagus or whatever?
He did. That's fine.
He did.
Yeah, he
paid for postage and everything, had the mask on, was like, waiting. Like, all right, in about 3 weeks.
Inside that container saying, okay, now hammer the crate shut and put the label on the crate, and like a helper is kind of like, okay.
On the side too. This side up.
Poppy field money. Like he's a Mongol warlord. Like you don't have him that kind of cash. And he can
like
ship himself
shipping Nurgle to Abu Dhabi. You got to make sure you have holes in the side.
And it was like 1930. Like, you know how long he must have been in transit? Like, did he have to pee? What did he eat? What do you do? Just
all right.
So many questions.
Well, one thing that we don't have a question about is our ratings. Again, it's time to get to that so we can get the recommendations. So, J.A., why don't you give us our 1 out of 4 scale for The Shadow?
1 out of 4 animated purbas.
Purbas.
I don't like you saying that word.
But a purba is actually is a knife. It's that tri-bladed knife. That's what a purba is.
Makes me uncomfortable.
Educating on this show. We're going to start off with Mikey. Again, he started off with our initial thought, and I think he should finish off by saying what he thinks of the movie.
You know, this is a strong 2. Like, I don't know. It's a 2.5. It depends on the mood, but like it's fun. It's certainly a fun movie to watch. If you know what you're getting into when you go to watch it, it's fun. It suffers from the same thing that a lot of people complained about Dick Tracy, and I love Dick Tracy, but they said that Dick Tracy was all flash and no substance. You know, it's what you get. So it's a nice 2 or 2.5 or something. You know, purbas.
All right, Chad.
Yeah, I'm gonna stay with the 2. I genuinely feel like there were people here that were, capable of doing a really good job. They just didn't do it. Like, there's lots of elements that could have been extra awesome. And I keep thinking of things like, remember the Purple Man from Jessica Jones and how creepy he was whenever he would just say something and then people would do it? Imagine if they did that with Sally Khan the Third.
She won Khan.
I don't respect the character enough to know its name. This is a 2. It was an effort, just not one that I found to be successful. Sorry, Alec Baldwin.
You guys have no joy. Maybe it's me being overjoyful about this movie. I'm going to give it a 3. I like this movie. You have to understand that I look at this movie with rose-colored glasses. This is the epitome of one of those movies that if it showed up on TBS or TNT in the middle of the afternoon, I would leave it on, even with the commercials. I would just sit there, turn my brain off. I would just watch it.
Yeah, I mean, if you need to take a nap and, just put that on. You'll be asleep in no time.
I wasn't going to go that far. It's a period piece. I love things that come out of the 1930s and 40s. I love any kind of movie that comes out of that. I love the pulpy aspects of this. Sure, they could have leaned a lot more into more of the darker aspects of it. They could have left out all of the strange James Bond quips when people die. You could have just left that out completely. I would have been perfectly fine with it. But you needed to do that to appeal to a mass audience, which maybe it would have been better if they hadn't appealed to a mass audience. Maybe this would have been better if it was just a niche thing or a cult thing.
Because it did not appeal to a mass audience.
It didn't. Yeah, it took a swing and it faltered. But
it was gorgeous, though. That poster with the eyeballs and the ooh.
Yes. It had Pierre Boyle in it. It had Jonathan Winters in it. It had Ian McKellen in it before anybody knew who that was.
They had the Ray Romano's dad. They had Alf's dad. They had the X-Men bad guy dad. Lots of dads.
It reminds me a lot of David Koepp also wrote the Crystal Skull movie for Indiana Jones, and people hate that thing, but I don't mind it. Yeah, so it's like a 3. It's not the best, but come on, it's better than average. It's okay.
All right. J.A., what do you say?
You mentioned that you didn't like the sort of James Bondy aspects of it, but I think that's perfectly sort of aligned with. Imagine it had this movie had Pierce Brosnan instead of Alec Baldwin, the lead. I think it might have been much better. I think Alec Baldwin was miscast. This is the perfect Tubi movie. If you guys like Tubi, I love Tubi. Tubi is this free streaming platform, and you can watch all these different kinds of movies. They have commercials, so it's just like TBS, but it's streaming. You can watch it on your phone, you can watch it on your iPad, watch it on your streaming TV, and they have like just a massive collection of B movies. Not all of them are great. They'll have some okay movies. They'll have some really bad stinkers, but you can throw something on and watch it in the background when you're doing other things, taking a nap. And this is that kind of movie. There are some gorgeous scenes in it. If you like film noir, if you like sort of 1930s gangster type movies, you'll love it. Or you'll like it. I won't say you'll love it, because there are some swings and misses as well. And tonally it shifts from being very serious to suddenly being very campy to suddenly these unintended humorous moments. So I thought, yeah, John Lone gave a good performance. Not enough John Lone movies, in my opinion. He's great in The Last Emperor. Penelope Ann Miller, just stunning and beautiful, and channeling Rita Hayworth in some of her outfits. But it's a 2. It's the 2 because it belongs on Tubi. Tubi.
Yeah. That was funny.
All right. So we'll be right back with more Last Comic Shop right after this. We're not going to have any more commercials for Tubi because I think we just gave a really great one. Maybe they'll throw us some Tubi cash. Stay tuned, though, for recommendations right after this.
Dragon Ball Z, One Piece, Naruto, all things that we love, all manga that were originally published in the legendary magazine Weekly Shonen Jump.
But not every series can run for 300 chapters and have a hit anime. This is David.
This is Jordan.
We're the hosts of Shonen Flop. Each episode we look at manga that ran in Jump that didn't quite make it.
We discuss what it did wrong, what it did right, how the series could have turned itself around, and ultimately, was it a flop or not?
Run all your favorite podcast apps, and you can find us at shonenflop.com.
Keep on flopping, floppers.
My name is Teresa Barber. I was in the United States Navy, and I served overseas in the Middle East and Africa. Early on in my career, I had a commander that taught our suicide prevention training, and the very next day, he took his own life. 90% of suicide attempts involving a gun are fatal. My way of continuing my service is to help protect my community by being a responsible gun owner and by storing firearms safely. Store all your guns securely. Help stop suicide.
Brought to you by End Family Fire and the Ad Council.
All right, we're back with more Last Comic Shop, and it is now time for recommendations. Yes, that time of every single show where we give you other things in addition to picking up The Shadow, Blood, and Judgment by Howard Chaykin, which you can find either in a trade from Dynamite, which I think is still available, or you can find the issues oftentimes in buck bins. For some bizarre reason, people just pitched them in there, which is sad because that art is worth more than just $1. I don't think you can get the Shadow movie at your local comic book shop. But you can find it on Tubi. Tubi. Why don't we start off with Mikey? You had a lot of recommendations for other Shadow books. Do you want to follow up on any of those?
Yeah, actually, the one that I'm recommending is actually essentially the prequel to Blood and Judgment. It's called Midnight in Moscow. It is sort of the Shadow's last adventure with Margot before he just ghosts her on a date. He's like, I'll be right back at a restaurant, and never comes back for 35 years. So that's the
after just getting her sex,
getting her all good and horned up, he just bails on her. It was a Dynamite series. It was 6 issues. You can't find it in a nifty hardcover with Blood and Judgment because only I have this.
Ooh.
Midnight in Moscow. It is also goofy. It involves Stalin and some other fun stuff. And it's the modern Chaykin, which his art style is different. It has changed since then. He still does panel layout and everything, and timing is still very important and things like that. But anyway, yeah, Midnight in Moscow to read prior to reading Blood and Judgment. So,
well, speaking of some superheroes that love to bring blood with their judgment, my recommendation is going to be The Savage Avengers. That's right. This is the first 6 issues of this particular series, done by Jerry Duggan with Mike Deodato Jr. on art. You know, all those characters that, like, meathead jocks at gyms love, like, you know, Punisher and Wolverine and Conan and Venom. Yeah, they put on all those t-shirts. Why don't we put them all on a tee? And initially I was just like, I don't know about this. I don't know. But my son became a huge Conan the Barbarian fan, so I bought it for him, and it was sitting around the house, so I read it, and I actually really, really enjoyed it. It tells the story of how Conan teams up with initially Wolverine, who prays to the god Pabst. I thought that was he's like, my god's Crom, my god's Pabst, and he's like Wolverine of Pabst, and I from there I knew I was in for some good stuff. But Conan and Wolverine originally team up against an old Conan foe in Kulan Gath, who is a wizard that's shown up in a bunch of the Marvel issues of Conan. He's actually the bad guy in one of my favorite issues of Marvel Team Up with Spider-Man and Red Sonja. He's the bad guy in that. But long story short, Kulan Gath is trying to bring back an ancient god. And so Elektra shows up, Punisher shows up, Venom shows up, Dr. Voodoo, used to be known as Brother Voodoo. They all show up to fight Kulan Gath and the Hand. But again, I thought it was going to be Cheeseball, and I was pleasantly surprised to find it was Cheeseball, but in a good way. I really did enjoy it, so I'm going to continue reading more Savage Avengers to come, and I think you should check out the first trade that's out there.
The Cheeseball issues were the sequel and follow-up with Kool and Gang.
All right. Well, Chad, what do you got for us this week?
They're having some good times. And I have good times shifting through those buck bins, as we've talked about time and time again. So my recommendation is something that I found 9 of the 10 parts. I haven't actually read it all the way yet, but it looks so neat. And there's a part of me that desperately wants to like The Shadow. And so I've plucked these out. It is The Shadow Year 1 by Matt Wagner, with art by Wilfredo Torres. And the covers on this book alone are worth picking up. You get people like Matt Wagner or Alex Ross or Chris Somney or Howard Chaykin on covers here. I don't know. I have a soft spot for those Dynamite books, whether it was the Lone Rangers that Dynamite put out, or some of the Green Hornet series by Kevin Smith and company, and Mark Waid did some great Green Hornet stuff. So I'm 1 issue away from completing my Shadow Year 1. But if you can find it, go ahead and read along with me once I get that issue number 9 in there.
I like his art a lot.
Wilfredo Torres, yeah. He's got that clean style.
Yeah.
It's very easy to look at.
All right, J.A., wrap us up.
I'm not going to recommend a Shadow comic book because I think you guys have nailed some of the best ones. We did talk about that Sienkiewicz one. I've seen some of that art, and that's bonkers 1980s. So I guess Sienkiewicz is 1980s too. I am going to recommend instead that you go watch a good movie as a palate cleanser, and that is The Last Emperor, Bernardo Bertolucci's epic on the life of Puyi, the last emperor of China, played part of it by John Lone. Also Peter O'Toole, Joan Chen, Victor Wong, Dennis Dunn, Vivian Wu, Lisa Liu, great actors. And it was shot in Beijing, one of the first Western movies to be shot in China after 1949. Just an incredible, sweeping, epic of a movie. And the bigger the screen you can watch it on, the better it is.
Yeah, with soundtrack music by David Byrne from the Talking Heads.
Now that's a guy who knows his suits.
And speaking of suits, we hope that you follow suit with listening to The Last Comic Shop every single week. Yeah, you can do that. You can go out to www.lastcomicshoppodcast.com, rate, review, and subscribe so you never miss any of our episodes. We've got 2 more coming up over the next 2 weeks here in May. We've got next week's awesome Daredevil extravaganza, which we're going to be revisiting the 2003 movie with
the director's cut of the 2003 movie.
But also the Ann Nesenti run of Daredevil from the 1980s. So you get some more 80s fix. And then we'll be finishing off with The Coldest City and Atomic Blonde here in Movie Mayhem. So we hope that you stick around for those last 2 episodes, as well as some of the other movie reviews we've got coming up later this year. Still, that Superman movie's coming out, that Fantastic Four movie's coming out, and you can check back with The Last Comic Shop to find out what we thought of both of those movies once they're released.
There we go. And it's enjoyable to be The Last Comic Shop podcast, but we don't want to be The Last Comic Shop, so we encourage everybody to get out there and find some shadowy stuff, whether it's The Shadow, Blood and Judgment by Howard Chaykin, or The Shadow, Midnight in Moscow by Howard Chaykin, or The Shadow, Year One by Matt Wagner and Wilfredo Torres, or The Savage Avengers by Duggan and Deodato. All that waits for you at your local comic shop, and then stop next door at the video place and look for a copy of The Last Emperor in celebration of Movie Mayhem. And J.A., when people go to our websites, they can find all the different things that we're putting out there, links to our social media, all that other stuff, but they can support us by doing what?
Well, they can buy some merchandise. Get Last Comic Shop t-shirts, coffee mugs, tote bags, hats, whatever, everything with the logo on it. This week only, we've got a special on The Shadow. It's a Shadow t-shirt. It's essentially just a black t-shirt.
You clouds your mind. You don't need to see what the logo is. Fine.
It's a little dark. It's a little campy. It's all things all at once.
Yeah, we've got our summer logo, which you can slap on a neon shirt and look 80s.
And if you want some prices on your comic book supplies that are more like the 80s, a little bit less than what you might be paying now, you just have to do something very easy, and that's going out to BCW Supplies and using what promo code, Mikey?
LCS Pod. That's LCSPOD, which is for Last Comic Shop Podcast. And if you recall, for a very limited time, you can get some free anthracite coal with your order. And remember, kids, cancer is for commies.
Oh my! I was going to say that 10% discount brings you into the 90s at least, like the Shadow movie.
Yeah, you want something to keep your DVD copy of The Shadow all looking pristine and everything. Make sure that you're getting some. I don't know if they have DVD. I'm sure they do. I mean, BCW Supplies has everything out there. Those self-sealing bags, they've got to have DVD stuff, please.
Put it in a box. Get yourself a fucking box.
What are you doing?
Okay.
What are you doing with all those comics? Get a fucking box.
It's Movie Mayhem.
Make sure that you're getting back to The Last Comic Shop next week. Until then, I was the host with the most, Andy Larson. I was joined by Chad Smith and Jay Scott and Mikey Wood, and we hope that you stay safe, stay cool. It's getting to be that summertime, and if you can't stay cool,
stay coolio, because it's a gangster's paradise, baby.
Oh, that's next week. That's next week.
That's next week. Damn it! Get yourself one of those Last Comic Shop tank tops. You'd be sporting.
Put that in a fucking box.
Comic Shop Podcast was a 2025 Black Angus production.